that didn't exist 5 years ago. And that creates some tension, quite frankly, in relationships and getting away from it, never decompressing. So what about transportation? Well, everybody, you know, the big study now, the big thrust right now is to go to autonomous, you know, driverless vehicles. I believe that's going to happen. Okay, so you have vehicles right now that already have some of those features, right? So you go on a long trip, right? You set your speed right now, so your foot isn't controlling, your brain isn't necessarily controlling that speed anymore. They have vehicles that can self-park. Why do we think it's so unlikely that a vehicle isn't going to be able to drive itself to? And so then what does that do to a community in terms of how many parking spaces do you need? How many parking garages do you need? How wide do your streets need to be in terms of lane widths? Are there other more efficient ways to move people and goods around the country? And what does that do to the labor market? Those are all kind of consequences of an innovation that is currently being examined right now. And so I have to understand, and our commission has to understand to some degree, what is going on globally, what's going on nationally in terms of innovation, political change. Another one, in our particular community, what's going to happen to the university? Do we really think this university is going to look exactly like this university looks today? There's online learning, okay, that's going to change. Is it all going to be just a fixed location? And what does that mean to our community? We need to think beyond that. So, what about global warming? What is that going to do? What about energy availability? Are we going to move to smaller houses? I suspect we are. Okay, so all of those things need to be kind of thought about when you start to think about where we're going as a city in a long-term basis. And we have the opportunity. Affordable housing is a huge issue. How do we go about addressing the affordable housing issue? Where do we put them? How do we pay for them? How do we engage people for employment opportunities? And you do some things here in the city of Lawrence that, quite frankly, are ahead of the curve in terms of workforce development. I'm not sure that everybody understands all those things, but all of those things have to be considered as we move forward in the strategic planning process, and we'll look at those things to the extent we can. The other thing I would say is sometimes perfect, okay, gets in the way of getting things done. We spend so much time trying to make things in a document form or an ordinance form absolutely perfect. And the moment it's perfect, it's adopted, 2 months later we go, oh, we missed that part, or something changes in the environment, we got to go back and change the ordinance. So I'm more about let's get something out there, let's get it worked on. Our public will inform us, our commission will inform us. If it needs to be changed, we can change it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We spend an awful lot of time, in my opinion, trying to make things perfect that very good would be, in my opinion, just as well, okay? And it would start to progress down a path that people see as important in terms of an issue or a project we should be working on. When you look at the budget, you look at this and you go, well, Marcus, you're deficit spending there to quite an extent, right? Because your expenditures exceed revenues. Well, when you compile all of the different funds together, a lot of this will have been built up funds, for example, that we are using or putting aside for a particular project, and this might then reflect how we're spending down some of those funds that were put aside for a specific purpose. For example, if you looked at our transit fund, you'd see a pretty substantial fund balance in the transit fund. Well, that was in part to create a multimodal facility that we would run all of, a hub that we would run all our buses to and make exchanges and maybe have Uber and taxis and Greyhound and everybody else located in that one facility. Obviously that hasn't happened, but when we budget sometimes that's the way that will look. And so you'll say, well, that's deficit spending. True, it's deficit spending, but it was designed to be funded in that fashion. Our general fund runs about $72 million, and when I talked about our capital improvement budget, it's about $328 million over a 5-year period, but there's way more than that in what's called the unfunded category of all the improvements that our staff has come up with and said, you need to consider these things as well. You need to take care of these issues as well. So there's no limit to the expenses that we could make in our community, but there is a limit to our resources, and at some point they have to logically match each other. This is something I like to show people because a lot of people don't understand how your dollar bill gets split up. But going from the left to the right, about 41% of your property taxes goes to the school district, about 34% to the county, and about 24% to the city. But, and this is for you, Rochelle, I get about 80% of the coverage when it comes to taxes and tax rates compared to my companions at the school and the county. I think Craig always takes great pleasure in the fact, Craig Weinock, the county administrator, takes great pleasure in the amount of scrutiny I get compared to what he gets. And we have a lot of fun with that back and forth. But I just think, Rochelle, you need to focus more of your attention on the priorities and where the bulk of the money is being spent. I'm just kidding. One of the reasons I think our percentage is lower, obviously, is we benefit more from sales tax than the other jurisdictions. So that's what your primary resource is in terms of how we fund things. Public Works, sidewalks is a big issue. We had a PED bicycle discussion, and they asked us to spend a lot more money, and we made a start on that and putting that together. One of the things it was really a challenge is how do we pay for sidewalk repairs? And I can tell you that my opinion is I walked around the community even before I took the position, I thought your sidewalks were in deplorable condition. And quite frankly, ped and bike is a huge attractor for people into communities. That's a really important thing when people are looking at neighborhoods and where they want to live. And quite frankly, we've been negligent in taking care of our sidewalks. Now, having said that, sidewalks are, under state law and under our city, the obligation and responsibility of the adjoining property owner. And that causes great consternation amongst those that get to pay for them. And people don't like that. And what I would say to you is, I get it. I understand that. I don't like to pay for them either. In my case, I have private streets. I get to pay for my private streets. Plus, I get to pay for all the public streets as well. Sidewalks, I understand, have more benefit than just to the adjacent property. They have some community benefit too. And so we're sharing in some of that responsibility where sidewalks meet intersections, and ADA now requires a certain grade of a walkway that comes down to meet the street. Those will be the responsibility of the city. Those that are impacted by street trees that we can determine, or water improvements or service lines that are our responsibility, will be our responsibility in terms of sidewalk repairs. That doesn't diminish the actual impact. One of the challenges we have is there are property owners in the community that, despite them owning property, are also income challenged. And so we're trying to figure out how to deal with those. A couple things we've talked about are having sidewalks assessed, and if you're income eligible, meaning you do not have the appropriate income to pay for those walkways, that they would remain on your property and they would only be retired at the time that the property was sold or transferred, which ultimately means that we're going to have to pay some carrying costs, right, for those sidewalk improvements. The tentative plan is to divide the community up into 8, go throughout the community every 8 years and make improvements to those sections just to bite it off. The estimate is someplace between $6 to $9 million in sidewalk improvements alone. Hard to imagine that they could cost that much. I can tell you in Iowa City, we used to calculate that the ADA improvements for the ramps We're approaching close to a third of the cost of our street improvements every time we did that. And part of the challenge with the ADA ramps is you have to meet a minimum grade. I mean, you can't just have the nubs at the intersection, knowing that you're entering intersection at any grade. It has to be a grade so that people don't get shot right out into a street intersection. So that's a big challenge. And it causes a lot more expense than what you would think. Street maintenance, we're spending about $12 million on our infrastructure, $8.3 million in capital improvements, and $3.9 for street maintenance itself. I'll speed up here a little bit. We had a big debate about Cassold. This was an interesting discussion because it was really a debate between complete streets and a more traditional design. It was a split vote. It was a 3-2 vote. The staff had recommended a more complete streets design, which would have had 3 lanes for vehicles, basically, 1 in each direction, and then a center turn lane instead of the 4 or 5 lanes that we have now. As I said, staff recommended that. The commission went with the more traditional, a wider. And the way that the council manager form of government works, when I make a recommendation or staff makes a recommendation and the commission decides to do something differently, it's our obligation to get on board and support that. That's the way the system works. And personally, that's the way the system works best. That won't change my view in terms of future recommendations, though, on a more complete street approach to how we design roads. And circling back to the comment I made earlier about what the future of vehicles are and how we transport ourselves and how that should inform the infrastructure we build, I think is an important thing for us to consider in these issues going forward. But I would tell you that when I don't have a successful recommendation, I always kind of look in the mirror and try and figure out what I could have done better in the recommendation or the information I provided, and approach it a little differently the next time. So hopefully I'll figure that out. This is really about a roundabout at Wakarusa from Inverness to Harvard is including a roundabout at Harvard. Those things cost a lot of money, but quite frankly, I'm an advocate for roundabouts. I can tell you they're a little confusing at first, but they clearly are a much more efficient way to move vehicles and people, and they are, quite frankly, less energy consumers than intersections with either traffic signals or stop signs. So I do advocate for them. Both in terms of efficiency and safety as well. They're much safer than typical 4-way intersections. They do take some getting used to, and I would say to you that some of ours that were probably designed early in the roundabout discussions in this country were probably not as designed as well as they could be. My view is that roundabout should be a nice level grade. You shouldn't have changing grades right in the roundabout itself. It causes a lot of confusion, I think, adds to some of the confusion. One of the biggest projects that we're working on right now, of course, is the Wakarusa treatment plant. It's a $71 million project expected to be completed in 2018. It'll provide a substantial future growth for decades to come for treatment. And the other thing that's kind of nice about it, it gives us an opportunity to shift where our operations are treated, so that if we have to do some improvements and repairs in one plant, we can offload to the other plant and vice versa. So there are some advantages to doing things that way. Just an example of cost associated with things, the water tank replacement is about a $5.2 million project completed in 2018. All of this infrastructure, and that's the thing that I sense here and I sense in a lot of cities. It's quite frankly, it's easy to build things. It's much more difficult to get the discipline necessary to maintain them and keep them up. And that's where we usually fall short. And all I need to do is say sidewalks to make my point. You need to stick with those things. And it's like your house. If you do something every, throughout the year, you're better off than waiting for the major catastrophe to hit. Parks and Rec, 10-year master plan, completely underway. We expect to see that back in front of the City Commission in December. We have this Lawrence Loop. It's a 22-mile bike ped kind of route around our complete city, and then it will have all sorts of connectors off of that as well. It's a lovely plan for our community, and I think it does encourage us to move from our neighborhoods to other parts of the community to access other public facilities and visit and so forth that necessarily would not be the case just trying to work your way through the typical grid of streets. Believe it or not, we maintain over 4,000 acres of parkland. We own 30 playgrounds, and we try to redo at least 2 playgrounds to make them ADA compliant every year. So it's a big program. A big part of the land that we have is under lease from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a gift, quite frankly, that our city has, that a lot of cities would love to have. So Eagle Bend, for example, our golf course is actually built on leased land that cost us about $1 a year. All of those soccer fields and play fields, athletic fields, they're all on property that is owned by our federal government under lease to us, and we take care of. So that's a wonderful, advantage that I think we benefit from as a part of that major project. Emerald ash borer, I always like to joke that I brought emerald ash borer with me
Yes.
to our community because it actually started in Michigan.
Yeah.
And I was there
Yeah,
for
you're
22
right.
years and dealt with emerald ash borer, everything from injecting the trees to cutting the trees down. I then went to Iowa City, and guess what? It just showed up in Iowa City when I got there. I come to Lawrence, it's just showing up in Lawrence. So it must have been in my suitcase, but it's come with me, and it's a pretty devastating. If we have 3,200 public trees, can you imagine how many trees we really have when you consider all the private property that we have that we're going to have to deal with this emerald ash borer? And you talk about the global world. This isn't invasive, right? This is one of those things that's happened to us. Living in the Great Lakes state of Michigan, we saw a lot of these invasives, especially in the water. And this is in our trees as well. Public safety, we had this whole issue about our public safety building, our police station, and consolidating that. I absolutely do think consolidation is something that would benefit our police department. I actually think it would benefit a number of our facilities in our community to make us much more efficient in the way we operate. We have buildings all over the place. I think staff talks about 50-plus buildings that we operate out of. That's just not really the most efficient way to do it. And one of the things that's really under the radar is our whole public works operation is in bad need of repair, and quite frankly, they haven't even addressed the issue, even approached the issue of getting those facilities up to date. And quite frankly, it's one of our core services. I think we could operate a lot more efficiently with some modern facilities. How many of you realize that the county has brand new public works facilities? By show of hand. Yeah. You should see their new public works facilities. It's state of the art. It's absolutely beautiful. I think it was a missed opportunity possibly for us that we could have combined facilities with them. And it's one of the things, quite frankly, that you do as well as any place I've been, and that's your work with the county. Mm-hmm. You share your medic, you share the health department, you share the senior center, you share planning and services. So you do a lot of that, and that's way ahead of the curve, by the way, for a lot of places. I actually think we can do even more. You've got the culture to do those things, and I think it would actually make things more efficient if we could get ourselves there. a lot of times these things are challenged because parochial interests kind of get in the way of these things. But quite frankly, I do think that those are opportunities for us, and we need to have open discussions about those and consider those opportunities for this area, especially in an environment where the state is, has taken some pretty drastic measures in terms of the amount of revenues that we'll be able to raise. Fire Station 1, which is downtown, is going to see an overhaul. Believe it or not, that's about a $6 million project. That's also where our senior center is housed. And so initially the project was just to renovate the part that the fire department is in. The fire department's actually moving into space that the senior center is currently in. So when I looked at it, I asked what I thought was a pretty logical question: why aren't we doing the whole building at the same time? It just doesn't make sense to do it piecemeal. They share HVAC and electric and plumbing. If you're going to do it all at once. So that's what we're doing. The county was gracious enough to help fund some of this, and we actually had previously designated this building as a historic building, and so we'll benefit from some historic tax credit revenue that will come to this building as well. So that facility will be upgraded. It will be a first-rate fire station, but it'll also accommodate the senior center, and the director of the senior center, along with the board of the seniors group, has developed their own strategic plan, and this building will accommodate how they see moving into the future. We achieved a Class 1 ISO rating, and usually I tell you your insurance premiums will be benefited from this, but quite frankly, after you get to about a 3 or a 4, your residential rates are not much impacted. There might be some improvement to the commercial, so I think that's a little bit overstated, but I can't blame the fire department for puffing a little bit and getting a #1 rating. And the 2020 plan, which will really create our vision for 20, so I guess we're going to have 2040 vision going forward. And we're currently in the process of doing the sign code review, which usually are fairly contentious reviews with our business community, so that always creates a lot of excitement, so I'll let them deal with that and stay out of that one. And that's the presentation at this point. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Go ahead, sir.
A couple of questions. Are there any plans to extend Burroughs Trail north of 11th Street? And the other question I have is, what's the difference for you? What's the difference, and how is Iowa City and Lawrence different, and how are Iowa City and Lawrence the same?
Well, I think the biggest thing I see in terms of the town-gown relationship, or the university